So now I'll pass it over to Patricia to tell us a bit about herself and her story. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Danielle. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about what happened and my experience with child abduction. By the way, before I get started, I want to say that that sounds like a really great idea, giving a lottery or whatever for people to tell their story, because I would have died to be able to tell my story. The problem when my children were kidnapped from me, they were kidnapped in 1989 from me living in the United States and taken to Saudi Arabia, to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where they were held for 14 years. There was no internet, there was no emailing, there was really nothing at the time. And I had no way of getting my message out. I had no way of letting people that knew them, that knew me, that might have helped me to get any message to them unless I wrote a letter. And that's what I did. I wrote letters and letters to everyone in my children's family, everyone in the neighborhood and the community in Saudi Arabia, women that I knew, and I didn't get one response. Not one person answered me. So having this idea about having a podcast and allowing people to share their story is brilliant. I think that's a great thing. Anyway, so my story started in the 1980s when I met my husband. His name was Abdul Rahman Abar, and he was a student at Boston University. He came from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. I was a young 17-year-old, my first year in college, away from my family, and he drove up in a car. I was at a party and he drove up in this fancy sports car, and I just, oh my God, I'd never seen an Arab in my life. I'd never met anyone who was so worldly. He had been raised and schooled in England. He had a British accent. He was very rich. He was very handsome. He was very sophisticated, much more sophisticated than the freshmen in college that I knew. You know, boys of that age, they were boys, and they hardly could even afford to take you to a hamburger joint for a hamburger. Oh, I'm sorry. The dog's somebody. I'm sorry. She won't bother us. Anyway, and so when I saw this man, this handsome man, he was only 2 years older than me, but it seemed like, oh my God, he was like a man. And he drove up with this car, and he obviously liked me too. And he pulled over, and my friends knew him, and we were introduced, and I was like falling over myself, like how exotic, how exciting, how unbelievable. It was around the time of the oil embargo. And so we heard these mysterious descriptions of these Saudi Arabians wearing their white robes. And here this guy was so sexy. And so I fell in love. And he also fell in love with me. And it's not like we didn't know each other. We dated for many years. I think about 6 years before we got married, because he was older. He graduated. I finished college. I went to grad school. And then we finally did get married. I went to Saudi Arabia. Um, it was shockingly different than where I had grown up, but you know, I was a believer that love prevails and love is the most important thing. And so even though, in spite of the fact that it was a very primitive country at the time, I know it's changed, but at that time it was really primitive. There were no paved roads in Jeddah. There were no phone lines, maybe one phone line to like a whole family. You know, there was there was nothing, no way to communicate with the outside world, and very, 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 very religious. They have a very strict sect of the Islamic religion, Wahhabism. It's one of the most strictest of the sects of Islam. And so, you know, not only did the family follow the religion, but they did it like on steroids. So that didn't stop me. None of that stopped me. And we got married. I actually wrote a book about the experience that describes Jeddah and life in Saudi and all of that. And I can get into that later, but it was a very, very amazing experience. And it didn't dampen my love for him. I still loved him and I loved the family and I was happy. You know, it was a little scary, but I could deal with it. Um, Little by little, I think both of us we felt like we were stagnating in Saudi Arabia. And my husband at the time decided, which was fantastic, to go to law school at Georgetown University. And so we were able to leave Saudi Arabia and live in the West. And we lived there for many years. He went to law school, he got a job in a law firm in DC, then he changed his mind, he learned how to play polo. We went all over the world, you know, with the polo crowd and with the jet set crowd, and it was a crazy life. We had two children when we were in the United States, my son Kareem and my daughter Sultana. I gave birth to them in Washington, D.C. And little by little, everything seemed very happy, but little by little, our marriage deteriorated, sadly. It got to the point where I caught him with several women, and he said to me, I'm Saudi and I can marry four women. And I was like looking at him with his good looking, you know, with the British accent, fancy clothes, sports car, all his life, you know, living in the West. And I said, well, what do you mean you're Saudi and you can marry four women? I guess you can by law, but not with me as your wife. When did we ever discuss this? You know, it'd be like you're marrying someone, and suddenly, after you're married for a few years, you have kids. They say, "Oh, we're going to go live on the moon." You know, I've made our reservations. Like, wait a minute. So I I realized he was very serious. That he intended to cheat and to have infidelity, and I couldn't keep up with it. And eventually we ended up getting married. So it's a little personal, but I wanted to share our reasons. It wasn't his family that was bad to me. It wasn't the country that I mean, it got me down a little, but not enough to divorce. It was him personally, the way he behaved in our marriage that made me want a divorce. And we did get divorced. We were living in Florida and Washington, D.C. at the time. He was playing polo. He was, you know, not really working. His family didn't really care. They just sent money. And because I wanted a divorce, he started threatening me. Well, you're not going to keep your children. I'm gonna keep them. And you know, in the court, I told them he's threatening me. And they said, well, he lives here. Where would he take them? And I said, no, maybe he'll take them back to Saudi Arabia. Well, he hasn't been there in many years. Why would he do that? Anyway, long story short, the court of our country, the Maryland Divorce Court, gave this man, my ex-husband, unsupervised visitation of both of our children. I fought for 1 year. I fought with everything I had. I sold everything, all my jewelry, my house. I sold my house. I had to pay lawyers, international lawyers, like in the two countries. I had to pay, you know, State Department lawyers. There was no way that I could get anybody to really be on my side. And that's one of the first things that I want to point out is that I feel like this country has to get their act together. The United States has to get their act together with figuring out how to have parental laws, parental custody laws sort of brought into alignment between countries, because it was obscene how there was no one that could help me, no entity that could help me, nobody cared to help me. But anyway, my husband got the unsupervised visitation of the two children in Florida. And within 1 day, he jumped on a plane, left the country with them, and I did not see my two children for 14 years.